Fundamental to environmental issues are things which affect our everyday lives, such as economics, or how our jobs and transfer of money is affected by our policies with the environment. So politics and of course public policy are involved in controlling factors which can lead to preservation or damage to our environment. So we're going to go through each of these, starting with economics, and the line between them isn't always so concrete. So some of these things we'll be talking about together. So first, as an example, we're going to talk about China. Now, some information about China. The Chinese economy has grown at 7% per year these past few years. Before that, through the 90s and early 2000s, you saw 10% growth in the gross domestic product. So how many products they were producing and selling, their economy was growing. And that is an unprecedented amount of growth in that amount of time. It has started to slow, but this increase in GDP has also increased their internal buying power. So now most people in China have, not most people, but a lot more people are having cars, live in apartments, and 90% are literate. A lot of them live in cities. However, this hasn't come with major environmental problems. So their growth has not necessarily been sustainable or environmentally friendly. So some problems have included pollution, which has changed the color of the water, increase in cancer rates because of the pollution, air and water pollution. This here is a picture from the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, where the air was so polluted they had to turn off many of the factories for weeks before the Olympic Games, just so that there would be the air would be clear enough for the athletes to breathe during their outdoor activities. China itself what led to this growth was the decentralization of power, allowing local areas and governments to control and develop economic activity. This led to ignoring environmental policies or not implementing them, or some areas did not have any environmental policies at all, at the cost. So the environment was degraded so that local populations could have profits, right? And so here's an example of a major problem, a major environmental disaster, where this is called the Yellow River. Normally it just looks like a normal river, but because of major pollutions, it caused this and changes in the chemical structure, it caused it to turn red. Okay, so at this point, this is where the public will get involved and be like, okay, we have to do something different because we can't have our waterways turning a significantly different color because of pollution. And so this really highlights a number of issues. So first off, economic growth can lift millions out of poverty, and that's what it does. So it increased the well-being of a lot of people before, which had a very low standard of living. China's growth currently, however, is unsustainable. It can't continue to grow at that rate, especially considering the environmental problems. And industrialized countries have laws and regulations to address the problems, but they need to be enforced if you want to ensure health and safety of the people. All right, so China is a good example for what can happen through growth and how they've probably done some things very well, but the environment for the most part has been ignored. So what is economics? It is a social science. So it's not a hard science like biology or physics, but it's studying human behavior in their production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Also is involved with theorizing or making theoretical models for how people will spend money, how economies will function, and so forth. Economic goods and services are connected to and depend on the environment. They are all taken from the environment in some way, which we mentioned before. All right, this figure outlines really the basics of an economic system. The economic systems are social and legal arrangements people construct to satisfy their needs and wants. So we have households and businesses. These are generally the two areas in which goods and services flow. Capital can be in the form of a monetary, like money, which can be used to pay for labor and thus pay for goods and services to businesses, but they need workers, so workers are paid for labor. Those businesses take from the land resources from their environment to produce products and services for households. Okay, so that's kind of a double flow of capital and labor. Our three factors of production and economy are land, labor, and capital. Again, the land is where the environmental factors are, which are being pulled from the land, whether it be in food or resources. The labor, people are need to harvest these resources from the land, and so they're paid for that. And capital then is we'll go through that later. All right, so there's two generally different economic systems: a centralized dictatorship and a capitalism, which is a democracy generally. In a dictatorship, you have rulers that make all the decisions, and the government owns and manages industries, such as in China or the former Soviet Republic. In a capitalist society, you have a free market economy where it hands, for the most part, the market itself decides prices. Most goods and services are controlled by private entities. The supply and demand then are the interplay of the want and needs versus the production and supply. And self-interest and competition are the main driving forces. So resources include land, labor, and capital. And ecological economists argue that the environment encompasses the economy and not the other way around. Economic production then converts the natural world to a manufactured world. Resources from the environment are transformed by labor and capital and then re-enter the environment as waste. Okay, and if you don't do anything to that waste, then it can have devastating consequences. So here then is a really outline what we said before. So you have materials going into this economy. They're going to be altered in some way. You may also have energy products such as oil, natural gas. They're consumed, and then you have waste either as heat energy or as garbage or municipal waste, whatever. Sometimes you can recycle those and use them again. And the environment is the ultimate source of these goods. Now, and there are then economic and environmental indicators, which can vary in an economy depending on whether it's a low-income economy, middle-income, or high-income economy. And generally, these are the problems you see in each. So this blue line, if you are a low-income economy, the environmental problems are generally in unsanitary water and untreated sewage. Okay. And as economy develops, gains more and more per capita income, this becomes less and less of a problem. It becomes a good and service which is taken care of through the market economy. In the middle range here, most of the problems include air pollution and from sulfur and carbon and particulate matter. So smog, acid rain, things like that. But generally those are solved through when people have more income as well. In the greater income, neither of these high income countries, neither of these are a problem. What is the most problem is now most people have cars, or most people have ways in which they can live further from the city, and so traveling occurs a lot more in these high income economies. And so the problems are CO2 emissions and sprawl, which is really the spreading out of human habitation further and further from economic centers. All right, so capital. I said we were going to talk about that later. So capital is can be split up in a few different ways. The ecosystem capital is the role of the natural ecosystems as the essential life-supporting elements. And we can split most capital up into these three categories. The natural capital, which is the ecosystem capital, plus non-renewable mineral resources such as fossil fuels and minerals. Produced capital is human-made infrastructure. So these are going to be our buildings and roads, ships, power lines, those sort of things. And intangible capital, which is education and resources that influence human well-being. Now, it's found that intangible capital, if you have lots of this in an economy, generally human well-being is much higher. Intangible capital generally goes with a decrease in corruption and crime and environmental waste. And so with education, you have generally more sustainable societies or economies. Capital and all its different parts generally increases the well-being of a society. And that's all I want you to get out of this figure. But you can split it up into so many different ways. But these abilities or products from capital increase the well-being and livability of individuals and thus the society. All right, so now kind of moving on to public policy. Environmental public policy are the laws and regulations that deal with the social society's interactions with the environment. And so we have to control how we are taking resources out of the environment. The two goals of environmental public policy are to improve human welfare and protect the natural world. And sometimes it seems those are in contradiction to each other. Generally, public policies address prevention or reduction in pollution. So conservation of areas, conservation of species, conservation of resources. They also might regulate the use of natural resources. Now again, if you do not have these in place, you may end up with, or they are ignored, you may end up with problems such as we saw in the Flint water crisis in Flint, Michigan, where there was monitoring being done, there was lead found in the water, but then there was no notification to the public, there was no mandated safety regulations followed afterwards. And so a lot of people are in trouble because they didn't follow the environmental public policy on the clean water. Also, this is a picture of early settlement of the western United States, which when they first were allowed to go and to settle these areas, there were many roaming buffalo. And people hunted them without any sort of regulation, and sometimes would even shoot them without even taking anything from them. But the unrestricted access to this caused a major decline in the species and almost its extinction. All right. So public policy has two approaches. You have the command and control strategy, which basically is, all right, we're going to set up this law and then we're going to enforce it. And then we have a market strategy where rather than spending money on enforcing it, let's just give incentives or other monetary ways in which we can control how people use resources, such as taxes or tax breaks, and providing market incentives for investment in environmentally sound policies. Now, a policy has a life cycle, right? And so that's what this figure is showing here. As countries develop, they deal with different problems, different environmental problems, different policies arise. And it goes through first this area of recognition, usually scientists, such as these scientists here, who discovered that chlorofluorocarbons are putting holes in the ozone layer. Okay, after it's recognized as a problem, then there is a point at which formulation, where they have to form some sort of policy which is going to solve the problem. As it does so, it usually has lots of media attention. So usually after recognition, there may be some sort of dissension or some sort of opposition to it. When it's being formed, it has much political weight. After it's being implemented, then it has less and less media coverage, and policy-wise, it has thought to be solved. And after it goes into control, then it is no longer a problem, so it's no longer news. Okay? Sometimes policies are kind of stuck somewhere in the middle, and most policies are in one stage or another. Some of them don't make it past the recognition stage because of that degree of dissension which you see there. You may have corruption or special interests or bribes or crimes or whatever, which try and keep that recognition of a problem downplayed so it can't receive any policy. An example of this is HIV in Africa. There was a major official in I can't remember which country, but he downplayed the problem of HIV and didn't allow medicines to be distributed in state-run hospitals that would have controlled the transmission of HIV. And so by just dismissing the recognition of the problem, he didn't have to do anything about it. All right, here are some environmental issues which are in different stages. Global warming, this one we've talked about. This one is in the formulation stage, but is still receiving a lot of dissension, like, is it real? Is it man-made? Is there anything we can do about it? There are some policies in place, but not very many. And then here's some other ones. Some of them that have been solved: sewer and water treatment, contagious diseases. For the most part, we have those under control. All right, so there is this often heard dichotomy that the environment and the economy are in, environmental policy and economic growth are usually in opposite directions, right? If you have an environmental policy which protects some sort of resource, then the economy can't grow. But for the most part, this isn't always true, but for the most part, environmental protection does not have an adverse effect on the economy. 1.7% of value added to certain things came from pollution control. 0.1% of jobs lost were environmentally related, so not very many. And states with the strictest regulations seem to have the highest job growth. This doesn't mean that every environmental policy is good for the economy, but it does generally mean that in the long term, it should have more positive effects than negative. The environmental protection industry is growing itself as well, so it is also a source for jobs. This is a cost-benefit analysis done in billions of dollars. Looking throughout the years, it's showing that the costs spent on environmental policy, usually the benefits outweigh the costs, especially if long-term benefits are taken into consideration. So most environmental public policy does incur a cost for some sort of pollution control, for example. But the amount of money spent on that pollution control goes to industries who then have to account for that pollution control. So in a way, it's just shifting the economic cost or capital to a different area of the economy. This again is a major job creating, profit making, sales generating industry. Here's a guy putting on solar panels here on the top of a house. All right, the argument that environmental protection is bad for the economy is not sound, right? You have to have environmental protection for long-term economic growth, and it creates a corner of the economy which provides jobs. All right, so policies now. Ronald Reagan, during his presidential tenure, issued Executive Order 12291, which is that all major regulations must have a benefit cost analysis. Okay, if the benefits outweigh the cost, then you can say it's economically justified and it's cost effective. Over the long way run, you have more benefits. If the costs outweigh the benefits, then this is not something we want to do, or may have to revise it to where we can equal those out. So a benefit cost analysis will increase efficiency, include all costs, and allow us to make sound public policies. Many times external costs, however, are not included or not calculated. An external cost would be something that is not normally thought of. So you may look at benefits and costs to economic production, but ignore costs and benefits of air pollution, right? So air pollution would be an external cost. So in order for a benefits cost analysis to be accurate, you have to include those external costs as well. Policies have made a lot of progress. Environmental regulations generally have paid for themselves many times over. In the decrease in healthcare costs. So yeah, a private company might save money by not having to monitor their pollution. However, generally everyone else is going to have to foot the bill in the cost of their health. So environmental policies have paid for themselves that way. Some accomplishments include reducing air pollutants. This is of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. Since 1998, you can see a lot more because we've reduced air pollution in that area. Water is cleaner, recycling has increased, which increases efficiency in taking materials, and toxic sites have been cleaned up. So benefit cost analysis is now a part of U.S. public policy, which makes a lot of sense. That being said, there's still a lot of opposition to environmental policies. No policy really comes without scrutiny or with some sort of backlash, especially since the 1990s when environmental backlash occurred or really started to become a major part of environmental policy discussion. Generally, conservatives want to reduce regulation to free up market forces. Okay, so if they see the bottom line or that businesses can make money, then people will have more jobs. If you can reduce the amount of cost, then you're going to increase those productions of the economy. However, the general public doesn't share this same view. How you lean on this may coincide with your politics. Okay? All right, so the way that some environmental policies are implemented has been through lobbyists and environmental organizations. However, this is somewhat flawed because lobbyists are very specific in their what they're lobbying for, but the environment is a public thing. It's something that really the public should probably have a say in, rather than just one special interest group. And so special interest politics oftentimes muddles and confuses and makes sound environmental policy hard to pass through legislature. However, citizen involvement seems to be at increasing as more people take it upon themselves to educate themselves about their current environment, which is something we're doing in this course as well. The public is directly involved in public policy including receiving the outcome of the policies. So if it's a negative impact, if you live next to a river and the river is very polluted because of environmental policies, well, you can, say something about it. So, private citizens can impact public policies by becoming locally involved in environmental problems, becoming members of environmental organizations, talking to your legislature as a responsible constituent, knowing the viewpoints of political candidates, and staying informed. And that way you can also have your hand in environmental policy as it affects you, as it affects your community, as it affects your state, and so on and so forth. All right.